Breaking today, CENTCOM is sharing new images of the blockade against Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. Take a look at this. It's got redirected 121 ships now sailing to or from the regime's ports. They're blocking the regime's ports. This as the U.S. and Iran are engaged in a new wave of strikes with peace talks really on shaky ground at the moment. Chief Foreign Correspondent Trey Yingst is in Tel Aviv now with the very latest on those talks. Hi, Trey.
Yeah, hey, Aisha, good afternoon. Iranian state media says that Iranian negotiators are no longer exchanging messages with the United States due to Israeli strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, those reports did not address the ongoing rocket fire from Iran's largest proxy, dozens of which targeted northern Israel throughout the weekend. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to strike the Lebanese capital of Beirut, specifically the Dahya neighborhood, if the attacks continue.
There will not be a situation where Hezbollah attacks our cities and our citizens, and its terror headquarters in Beirut and the Dahiyya remain out of bounds.
This morning, Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi and Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf attached a possible deal with the United States to the situation in Lebanon, with Ghalibaf saying on X, quote, the naval blockade and escalation of war crimes in Lebanon by the genocidal Zionist regime are clear evidence of U.S. noncompliance with the ceasefire. Every choice has a price, and the bill comes due. It will all fall into place. Now, these remarks come hours after the Iranians launched 2 ballistic missiles toward a U.S. base in Kuwait. That was in response to U.S. forces conducting multiple strikes over the weekend against Iranian targets, according to U.S. Central Command. These U.S. strikes hit Iranian radar and command and control sites for drones in Guruk, Iran, along the coast and on Keshem Island. CENTCOM described the action as defensive in nature to prevent Iran from attacking international shipping lanes, and after Iran shot down a $4 million U.S. drone. Now, Aisha, tonight, Iran's IRGC is threatening to target northern Israel if those Israeli strikes go after the Dahya neighborhood of southern Beirut. Aisha?
Okay, we'll watch it. Trey Yingst live for us. Trey, thank you.
All right, joining us now, retired Air Force Brigadier General John Teichert. John, great to see you. Where to begin? Okay, so let's begin here. CENTCOM putting out this message. Last night, 11 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. forces successfully intercepted 2 Iranian ballistic missiles targeting American forces based in Kuwait. These missiles were immediately defeated. No American personnel were harmed. U.S. Central Command remains vigilant. Will continue to protect our forces from Iranian aggression while supporting the ongoing ceasefire as a defensive measure. We also took out radar and drone launch facilities on Guruk and Keshem Islands. I mean, Iran's just going to keep doing this, right? And until President Trump does this to them, it's going to be the same thing.
John, I agree. And I think there were 3 rounds of what we saw this weekend during the last week. Iran provokes. They watch how we respond. It ends up being minimalist in nature, and we talk about how it's defensive in nature. They respond, and then we don't continue. And I think they're testing their underlying hypothesis, which is that we are eager to make a deal, and we don't want to escalate. And the only way that that cycle stops is if we start to strike at the heart of the regime.
Right. Okay. I've been directed to look up something that President Trump just put out on Truth Social. Let's take a look at this. I had a very productive call with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Will be no troops going to Beirut. Any troops are on their way have already been turned back. Likewise, to your highly placed representatives, I had a good call with Hezbollah, and they agreed that all shooting will stop, that Israel will not attack them, and they will not attack Israel. So it sounds like President Trump is trying to calm down Iran, which has said that the ceasefire includes Lebanon. It's an interesting development.
It is indeed, and I think Iran feels emboldened enough to walk away from the negotiating table in support of their proxies or the arm of the IRGC and Hezbollah. And I'm concerned that if we don't continue to support Israel and their ability to defend themselves in northern Israel against Hezbollah, then we're just demonstrating further eagerness and emboldening the regime.
All right. So what do you think is going on here? So Araghchi and Ghalibaf have both talked about the ceasefire includes Lebanon. I've never actually seen that in writing, though I haven't seen the new proposal, the Memorandum of Understanding. But if they say, hey, you can't attack Lebanon and expect us to talk about a ceasefire, and then President Trump calls Netanyahu and says, pull back the troops, calls Hezbollah and says, we'd appreciate it if you stopped attacking Israel, is that not throwing a bone to Iran, which is behaving so badly through this whole thing?
John, I think it is, and we are now 8 weeks into a 2-week ceasefire, and I think steps like this further embolden the regime and strengthen their negotiating position, whereas strikes by the United States and Israel on the heart of the regime would reverse that.
In terms of the position that Iran is in. This is what Senator Chris Coons said. Listen here.
Iran is stronger than they were 90 days ago before this war because they've used their cheap and lethal drones not just to close the Strait of Hormuz, but to attack our partners and allies in the region, harming oil and gas infrastructure, hitting our embassies and bases. And we need a stronger, better answer to Iran's ability to close the Strait of Hormuz at will.
Now, I would argue that Iran's not any stronger, that they're far weaker than they were. They've just chosen to use these drones. But to this idea, we need a stronger, better answer to Iran's ability to close the Strait of Hormuz at will. I mean, a lot of people are saying, yeah, they try to take out the strait, take them out.
No, and I agree with you there. And I think that the strikes that we undertook in the first 6 weeks of the war were operational and tactical in nature. But I don't think, unlike Israel, we struck at the heart of the regime. And I'm talking about those items within the regime that are their strongholds, their sources of power, the things they value most, internal security sites. I think if we renew kinetic activity and focus on those items, then it puts us back in the driver's seat in the strongest possible position.
You used to fly an F-22. Could we take out their capability of keeping the strait closed?
So now that's a combination of joint force activity. I think that is a possibility, and we saw a glimmer of that work in Project Freedom for a couple of days, and then we backed off. And I think it's worth either striking Iran and or forcibly opening up the strait. Otherwise, time is likely on the side of the regime as they try to wait us out and keep the strait closed.
I thought that this was an interesting observation by our friend Mark Thiessen on criticism of President Trump. He put this out on X. He said, those who say Trump killed the Ayatollah and now the new leadership of Iran is more radical, that's like saying we killed Hitler and now the more radical Nazis are in charge. There are no moderate Nazis and there are no moderates in the Iranian regime. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu would like to get back to his program of just taking out the leadership until they find somebody they can deal with.
Well, and I think, John, I think that might be the only way to ultimately reverse this trend, that the way we see a massive strategic success here is that we find a way to undercut and flip the regime. And I think where we started this war, which is taking out a large swath of the regime and their central military and political leadership targets, is the way that we can actually once again regain the initiative here and hope to see a fundamental change in the regime that would benefit our security objectives.
All right. Like you say, we're what, 8 weeks into a 2 week ceasefire?
That's right.
All right. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
for coming in. Now
be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.